Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping into a really fascinating guide on how to read deeply, how to truly understand a text, and how to move from just having an opinion to having a real earned insight. All right, let's kick things off with a quote that's, well, a little blunt, but it perfectly sets the stage. The guide we're looking at uses this classic line to make a really powerful point about opinions. The thing is, not all of them are created equal. So this brings us to our first big idea, the difference between cheap talk and genuinely earned insight. The author throws out this incredible challenge right at the beginning to take what he calls a vow of poverty on opinions. You know, the idea that maybe some viewpoints are better left unsaid until we've actually done the work. And the difference is just huge. A cheap opinion, you can form that in 2 minutes. It's based on a whim, a personal preference, and honestly, it has zero public value. But a qualified opinion, that's something that can take decades of dedicated study and experience to build. It's a real asset, something that actually contributes to the conversation. And this example, wow, it really drives home just how much commitment we're talking about. I mean, think about that for a second. 20 years soaking up knowledge in Plato's Academy before he even began to share his own philosophy. This whole idea that you have to earn your perspective through real investment, not just a knee-jerk reaction, that's really at the heart of everything we're talking about today. So the big question is, how do we build that kind of qualified opinion? Well, to answer that, the guide tells us what not to do first. It warns us about this really common trap, a way of reading that, frankly, a lot of us were taught. And that trap is what's known as formal text analysis. This is where you treat a text like it's a machine. You take it apart, piece by piece, examine its logical gears, and then you put it all back together. And yeah, it sounds super thorough, but it's missing something vital, something huge. And the author really doesn't pull any punches here. The argument is basically that this approach is so mechanical, so simple, you could teach a monkey to do it. It treats a text like a dead object, not as a living, breathing message from an actual human mind. So, the big danger here is that when you objectify a text like this, you basically suck all the life out of it. You end up missing all the subtle layers of meaning, you start to fall for this illusion that everything is just text, and you completely ignore the real-world human experience that sparked those words in the first place. So what's the alternative? If that's the trap, how do we get out? Well, the guide gives us this amazing alternative, and it's called the method of evocation. And what it does is it breathes life back into the text by connecting it to our lives. Okay, so how does it work? It's basically a 4-step process. First, you've got to read slowly. Just let the words sink in, let them make an impression without immediately trying to critique them. Then you let the text awaken your own evocations, the memories, the images, the feelings that the words bring up for you. From there, you connect what you're reading to the real world, the one you and the author actually share. And finally, you use all of that rich context to try and reconstruct the author's world, to really get a sense of where they were coming from. It completely changes reading from just decoding words into a real active dialogue. And to really hammer home the difference between just empty words and actual reality, the guide pulls out this incredible classic example, Aristotle's absolute takedown of the ancient Greek skeptics, who used to argue that knowledge itself was impossible. Okay, just look at this contrast here. On one hand, you have the skeptic's discourse, his words. He's saying things like, nothing is real. But then you look at his experience. The guy still eats, right? He says, knowledge is impossible, but he still manages to travel from one city to another. So Aristotle's comeback wasn't some long, complicated philosophical speech. Nope. He just pointed out that the skeptic's actions, his day-to-day life, completely proved that he didn't believe his own arguments. And this brings us to another really powerful idea. You see, you can't really argue with a set of words that has completely cut itself off from reality. It's like trying to jump up on stage in the middle of Othello to warn him about Iago. It's just not going to work, right? The play exists in its own self-contained world of words. To actually engage with the skeptic, Aristotle had to drag him out of that abstract world and plant him right back in the middle of our shared, lived reality. Okay, so this all sounds great in theory, right? But how does this method of evocation actually work on a real piece of writing? Let's see it in action. To show us how it's done, the guide takes a text by a really influential social psychologist, Kurt Lewin, and breaks it down. So let's dig in and see what this deeper reading method uncovers. Things a surface-level analysis would totally miss. Okay, check this out. On the surface, Lewin's text defines education as a social process. Pretty straightforward. A formal analysis would probably just nod and move on. But watch what happens when we use evocation. The guide's author compares Lewin's definition to his own real-life experience of learning, self-education, learning things on his own. And boom, that simple contrast reveals a hidden intention. Lewin wasn't really talking about education in the broad sense. He was talking very specifically about socialization, and from the point of view of a social engineer. That is a completely different meaning, and it was hidden right under the surface. So, what's the big takeaway here? It's that this method, it's not just another reading technique. It's a whole new lens. It's a tool that can totally transform how you engage with pretty much any text, whether it's philosophy, psychology, or even just a news article. Ultimately, this whole approach is about getting us to stop just asking, what does this text say? And to start asking bigger questions like, what world did this text come from? And how does that world connect to my own? All of a sudden, the text isn't a wall of words anymore. It becomes a bridge. And that leaves us with this final, really powerful thought to chew on. What if every book we read, every article we click on, isn't just a text to be analyzed, but an invitation to reconstruct and understand an entire reality? And by doing that, maybe we understand our own a little better too.